This video will work through problem 8.1 for Gapenski's Healthcare Finance, 5th edition. Okay, 8.1 asks us to work out some variances for Newark General Hospital, and here are their budget, their flex budget, and then their actual for what is this, nominally 2011, and these are in millions. So we'll be talking about like 0.3 will be 300,000. So to work this out, well, we have to remember a couple of things. First of all, each of these is a function of volume times price, right? And we can think of revenue as, the number of visits we do, or admissions, or scans, or whatever it is you want to talk about, times the price that we charge patients. Cost we can think of as, and this is in a fee-for-service, the revenue in a fee-for-service world is going to be strictly like volume of things we did times the price. Cost is always going to be the volume of the services we provide times the cost per unit. So we can think of that as a price as well. And then profit is going to be volume times the profit per unit, or contribution, per unit, if you will. So we can think of each of these columns as volume times price, right? And each of the rows as a function of volume times price. The static is is our budget right before we start to do anything this year. So it is our expected volume times our expected price. Our actual column, also volume times price, but it is our actual volume and the actual price we either paid if it's a cost, or earned if it is if we're thinking about revenue. The flex is kind of this emergence of the two, and it's based on the actual volume times the expected price. And we use the flex so that we can compare and hold constant either the price, if we're comparing between static and flex, or vary the volume if we're comparing between static and flex by holding the expected price constant, and then vary the price between the flex and the actual by holding the volume constant, if you see that, right? So if you can remember these things, this static, flex, actual thing can get very confusing, but if you can remember these three, what they decompose into, a lot of this stuff starts to kind of flow more naturally. Okay, so the first question is calculate and interpret the profit variance. Let's just grab another blank piece of paper here. So the profit variance is the actual profit minus the static profit. So that's going to be 0.3 minus 0.6. That gives us negative 0.3. Now, when we do profit variance and revenue variance, we go right to left. When we do cost variance, we go left to right. Now, why do we go right to left with profit and revenue variance? Well, the variance, what we want to know is, we predicted we would have a $600,000 profit. We actually had a $300,000 profit. So by subtracting the expected from the actual, or 0.3 minus 0.6, that gives us that negative 0.3. So by subtracting static from actual for both profit and revenue, we'll get a negative number when we have a negative surprise, right? So we thought we'd have 600. We actually earned 300. That's an unhappy surprise, right? And we capture that unhappiness by having the fact that the 0.3 minus 0.6 is negative. So the negative sign in this variance analysis process indicates that we're not happy with what our outcome was. Okay, so profit variance is simply the actual profit minus the static profit. Now, then it says, go ahead and calculate and interpret the revenue variance. Okay, well, revenue variance is actual revenue minus static revenue. So that's going to be 4.5 minus 4.7, and that gives us negative 0.2. And then it says calculate and interpret the cost variance. Okay, well, the cost variance, remember what I said, cost variance, we're going to work left to right. So cost variance in this case is static cost minus actual cost, right? And think about, okay, so why left to right? Well, we thought we'd spend 4.1, and oops, surprise, we spent 4.2. And so we're unhappy, right? Hence the negative sign. We are unhappy because we had negative, we spent an additional 100,000 more than we thought we would have to spend. So managers, right? Managers are supposed to work to keep the costs lower than what we expected, right? So we set this target of, all right, we're going to spend 4.1. Managers work really hard and try to come in below 4.1. Well, the managers didn't succeed. They actually spent more than they had anticipated. Now, here's what I want you to note is profit variance decomposes into revenue and cost variance. So if we add these two things together, negative 0.2 and negative 0.1, they add up to negative 0.3. We could draw that by saying, okay, profit variance breaks out into cost variance and revenue variance, right? Profit variance was negative 0.3, revenue variance was negative 0.2, cost variance was negative 0.1. So negative 0.1 plus negative 0.2 gives us negative 0.3. That matches back up to our higher level of variance. So you can always do that with your variance calculations. All right, next it says calculate and interpret the volume and price variances on the revenue side. Okay. So now we're going to decompose revenue variance into its component price variance and volume variance. So volume variance on the revenue side is going to be, we're going to look for where do we hold price constant and allow volume to vary? Well, that would be static and flex, right? Because between static and flex, you have volume expected and volume actual. So, but you hold price constant. So if you're comparing these two, the difference between these two is entirely from the volume variance and not at all from the price variance. Whereas over here, if we compared flex and actual, we're using the same volume, and the differences between these two columns is actually the price, the changes in price, right? So what we want is flex and static, and so we want flex revenue minus static revenue, right? So that is 4.8 minus 4.7, which is actually plus 0.1. Okay, but we remember our revenue variance is down negative 0.2, so that must mean that our revenue variance is coming from coming from our changes in price, not changes in volume. The positive volume variance is being offset by a much more significant fall in price, right? Because volume actually appears to be up a little bit. So price variance, then we're going to be looking for where is volume held constant and price varies. So you have constant volume between flex and actual, but changes in price here. So price variance is 4.5 minus 4.8, which gives us minus 0.3. And when we add those together, we get minus 0.2, which, as we just said, was the volume variance that we calculated earlier. Okay, and then it says, go ahead and calculate the volume and management variances on the cost side. I'm just going to flip this around, give us a clean sheet. So cost, remember cost, we're going to go left to right because a negative number from left to right is a bad thing because we are spending more than we thought. So cost variance breaks down into volume variance. Right, so we're looking for cost now, and where do we vary volume? It's static and flex, right? Price is held constant, so we want volume variance, and we're going to go left to right, so we want cost static minus cost flex. So cost static is 4.1, cost flex is 4.1, so there's no volume variance on the cost side. So it must all be coming from the managerial variance. And the managerial variance is really the price variance, they're just calling it managerial variance. And the reason they're calling it managerial variance is we recognize, particularly in healthcare, that our managers probably can't affect volume that much, but they can affect the price or the cost per unit. Or at least we expect them to try to, right? So instead of calling this price variance with respect to cost, we call it managerial variance to emphasize the manager's role. So where does price vary? Well, it varies between flex and actual because over here static and flex use the same price, but flex and actual use the expected and the actual. So we go 4.1 minus 4.2. gives us negative 0.1. Add those together, we get negative 0.1. And verifying here, right, our cost variance was negative 0.1, so we're good. All right. The last question just kind of basically asks you to summarize, the variances. So we can kind of start from the top. Right, we have a profit variance breaks out into cost variance and revenue variance. Cost variance then breaks out into managerial variance and volume variance. Right? Revenue variance breaks out into price variance and volume variance. And these add up to this, these add up to this, these add up to this, right? So you can always check your work by adding back up and trying to get back up to the original level.